COVID drastically changed the way that field sales needed to operate. And now that people are getting vaccinations and business travel is opening back up, people are getting back to the office. What does the future look like for field sales? And do some of the work from home habits like social selling continue on? Or is field sales back to the traditional model? Well, to answer that question, I've brought on an executive from a semiconductor company to talk about the experiments that he conducted prior to COVID on virtual selling and what he thinks the future might hold, as well as how marketing can better support the field sales function. Let's do this.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, TREW Marketing. TREW is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit trewmarketing.com. And now, on with our podcast. Hey, everyone. I'm here with Michael Knight. He's the president of TTI Semiconductor Group. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
It's good to see you again. Hey, before we dive in, I wanted to express my sympathy towards you and the TTI family. I know that your founder and CEO, Paul Andrews, passed away unexpectedly not too long ago. And that's got to be a really tough time on the organization.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been an interesting month and it's been just about a month since we lost him. And, honestly, we're all kind of, those of us who are in the office, and he has been in the office straight through COVID. You keep expecting him to show up in your doorway.
Yeah.
So it's a little weird, especially, this company really is Paul Andrews. We had our 50th anniversary and he founded the company, and it's a product of his culture, his approach. If you've ever read the book, Good to Great, he was a big good to great guy. He's, I think, the ultimate tech hedgehog. And so him not being here, it's pretty weird. But the business has transitioned to Mike Morton, who's been appointed our new CEO by Berkshire Hathaway, our parent company. And Mike has grown up in the business, and he's in essence Paul Jr. So the culture is in great hands. So, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. And just as a little bit of a case study, and forgive me, I'm just still a marketer and a communicator at heart. I found it interesting how I learned about it and things that were on your website and socially on LinkedIn. And so I thought the communication was handled really well. So as an aside to all the marketers out there listening, when we talk about crisis communication and preparing for the unexpected, this is one of those situations where it would be nice to have a playbook for if something like this happens, how do we communicate with our, stakeholders about it? So your company did a nice job at that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So before we launch into our topic today, give us a little bit of background about TTI and your role with the company.
So the company was founded in 1970 by Paul Andrews, the guy we've been talking about, who was actually a buyer of electronic components for General Dynamics when they were building fighter planes up here in Fort Worth. And he got caught up in a riff and decided that he was going to get into the component supply business, and started actually with military resistors, which is probably far and away his favorite component. But so it's a Fort Worth company, and has thrived. I've never had a down year, never lost money. Wow. And I came into its orbit in 1990. I was the newly minted head of sales and marketing for a startup connector company by the name of McKenzie Technology, and I was building a distribution network to sell the connectors to the long tail of customers that we thought was out there. And TTI was high on my radar for a distributor recruit. They were at the time maybe 150 million. I'd been around for 20 years. We're just starting to globalize. Had largely been a resistor and capacitor distributor and was starting to diversify into connectors. And I was very well aware of them, actually through a marketing campaign that they ran for a couple of years, where they TTI styled itself the best little warehouse in Texas.
Oh, stop it. That's great.
The print ads were awesome. And so I was in hot pursuit of them as a distributor, and took a couple of years, but got them to take my line on. And in the process, got to know them. And so if you fast forward to how I got here, that company, McKenzie Technology, was acquired. Actually, I stayed through a couple of acquisitions and then left and got involved in another startup, this in the semiconductor space, that brought me down to Texas. Actually, I'm a Texas native. So I was born in Austin at St. David's Hospital right there off of 35. And so got me down to Texas again. And we built this business up and then sold it in 2003. And I was back, and I went back to California where I had been, and I was back here having lunch with Mike Morton and a guy named Craig Conrad. And Mike said, they were doing some succession planning. He had just been promoted, and he wondered if I would be interested in actually joining. And which I did. I backfilled him. And so for the last 17 years, I've been working here in a number of different roles. And most recently, I had the opportunity, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, to form the TTI Semiconductor Group, which semiconductors is not something that TTI is known for. In fact, we've been famously adverse to semiconductors. It's part of the hedgehog approach to life. But we had seen an opportunity and a need in the market for the TTI style of distribution in the semiconductor space. And so we were getting into it so late that the only sensible way to do it was through acquisition. So I've spent the last, I guess, 5 years or so acquiring specialty semiconductor companies and assembling them into this group that maintaining their brands, which is I think a whole interesting conversation in and of itself, because it's the opposite of what we've traditionally done in the M&A space, where you integrate, consolidate, strip out redundancies, cost reduce, theoretically improve your combined gross margins and net margins. But that's not what we're doing here. And so we have this portfolio of companies that have an awful lot of commonality, and it's been that's been a blast. And related to that, I have a second job here, a corporate job, developing synergies between the whole family of companies, which includes Mouser Electronics and Sager, Core TTI, and finding ways to connect the companies up so that we can deliver an enhanced value prop to customers and suppliers, but without undermining the separate nature of these specialty businesses that we have. And that in and of itself is crazy interesting, and the source of just massive go forward opportunity for TTI as we figure that out.
There's so many different topics I would love to dive into based on what you just said, but of course today we have a particular focus. But wow, you're a busy guy. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today, because that's a lot to juggle.
Oh well, it's actually I think I've got the coolest job in the industry, and I've been very fortunate in that TTI, Paul and Mike in particular, have been very, very accommodating to a personality trait that I have, which is insatiable curiosity. So I get involved in lots of different stuff, and they've been very supportive of it. So it's honestly, a lot of what I do to me feels like a hobby.
What a great way to look at work every day.
No kidding. Yeah, no kidding. Very fortunate.
Yeah, well, I see that curiosity in you. I saw it from when we from the very first time we met, which was on a panel. So as you know, we were both on a supply frame executive roundtable focusing on digitizing the customer experience. And it was during that time I learned so much about what you had going on. You had some really interesting pilot projects, which we're going to talk to today regarding field sales. And then oh, sorry, my watch is not understanding what I'm saying. There goes Siri. There goes Siri. I have an Australian man for Siri, by the way, in case you're wondering why Siri sounded funny.
Nice.
Anyway, but the other thing that struck me, Michael, is it was so refreshing to hear you acknowledge how painfully behind the industry is when it comes to digital marketing and sales in general. And I just was fascinated to hear why you're saying that and what you're doing about it and where you are along your journey. So anyway, that's why I was like, oh, I have to have Michael on. I need to explore further and what he's doing here. So
Yeah, this is something I've marveled at for a long time. That it feels a little, actually sometimes dangerous, maybe isn't the right word, but it feels a little dangerous to say it out loud sometimes. But I find our industry to be way behind the curve in terms of digitization of our engagement with all our stakeholders, customers, suppliers. And what is most curious about that is, we're in the electronic components business. So we are enabling the companies and the technology that are digitizing the world.
Yeah, right.
Are
There's some
creating
irony.
like the Amazon marketplace, and this whole idea of marketplaces as how things, even in B2B are going to get sold, which is another really interesting topic, I think. We enable it, but we are not taking advantage of it. And not only are we not taking advantage of the possibilities of digital engagement, or let me say, we really weren't pre-COVID. We'll talk a little bit about what COVID's done on this score. But the other thing we enable is the whole big data AI thing. Mm-hmm. And we've got massive amounts of big data that's very valuable, especially in a time like we're in now, where every single supply chain has just been wrecked by lots of things, COVID, and then demand recovery after COVID, and fires and earthquakes and floods and deep freezes here in Texas. We all just learned that Texas is the source of a lot of the world's plastics, mm-hmm. Start here, come here. And so a lot of those resins and things are now offline because of the deep freeze, which is having ramifications throughout the electronic component supply business and everything else. And unfortunately, far too much in our life is made out of plastic these days. Yeah. Another topic. But anyway, so we've got this big data that would be incredibly valuable and useful in making supply chains more resilient, and yet we haven't figured that out. Much of what we do today and how we do it is kind of like how we've always done it. Even pre-ERPs, pre-internet, pre-network, multi-user computing. There's a lot of old analog stuff that we've carried forward. So that dichotomy I've always found it to be interesting and strange, and also, quite frankly, this source of amazing opportunity for the companies and people who figure it out, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And really that's the crux of what I'd like to talk to you about today. So I know that in looking and improving the customer experience and how to digitize certain aspects of your organization, you started to experiment with your AEs within the organization. And this is way back before COVID. So what led you to start that pilot, and tell me a little bit how it went?
Yeah, so we are, as an industry and very much as a company, very sales heavy and marketing light, right? So
Pretty common.
yeah, pretty common. And by that specifically, I mean, we spend a lot on traditional sales and selling and sales tools and the like, and under-resource marketing. And what's happened, and this is, as you point out, pre-COVID, way in advance of COVID, is we've come to sense that it's not the best way to be. The old style selling is not necessarily how the world works anymore, especially the newer generations in the workplace, right? They don't like to be communicated with that way. They don't like to be engaged that way. In fact, one of the things, I might have talked about this on the supply frame panel, was that I've seen over time is that sales is a 4-letter word. I mean, people don't like to be sold to. University students that I talk to, is doing some guest lecturing, none of them have any aspiration at all to get into sales.
Wow.
So there's a real disconnect here between the function and even how we title it and where the world's going. So that creates some pressure. And then it's made worse by the fact that it's pretty expensive. And our industry is known for more for less. You know, the TV that you bought last year, you can get a better TV for less money this year. You know, what memory costs, you look at the cost of the price of memory over time. You know, it's going up like this and the price is going down inversely. And so what that does is it creates a lot of margin pressure on all our businesses. And the 2010s, it really became evident. I mean, we were all feeling it. Gross margins were under pressure. We have these expensive cost to serve models and sales cost models, which then puts big pressure on your net margins. And then to make it even worse for those companies like my semiconductor group that utilize application engineers, you know, these are highly technical, often fairly expensive people, that creates additional pressure. So,
but necessary, of course. This is more
absolutely.
complex offering. I mean, you can't really get around that. You're adding value. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have this, you know, you have this challenge. There's what you need to do to be in this business. There's what you can make when you do this business. And it's getting stretched pretty thin as you know, over time. So we had already been looking at this pre-COVID, and one of the things that we were, out of necessity, you know, it's the mother of invention, forced to do is rethink our application engineering program. So for those who aren't familiar with application engineers, they don't have a sales quota. They're a resource, they're consultative, and so they kind of they float around, they kind of clump up in places. And the way they traditionally got deployed is when a field salesperson needed technical help at a customer, they would call in an application engineer, and then the application engineer would have to fit that in with their schedule, and most of the time it would involve getting on a plane. So it's, you know, the time sensitivity thing was terrible, wasn't very cost effective, but we've been under a lot of pressure to add more. All of our suppliers want dedicated application engineers.
Well,
And
who
fleet.
wouldn't?
Yeah, of course, you know, exactly. Who wouldn't? So we got got looking at all of this and trying to figure out how we could meet the need. And so it wasn't hard for us to then settle on, well, we're going to use technology to do that. So we came up with what we called a virtual application engineer, which its heart is, we set up some labs, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and that's where the application engineers are. And then we equip the sales team, who many of them actually are engineers themselves, but just not as in deep or current in the technology as an application engineer would be. We gave them these kits that involved a camera with a high quality microphone and a variety of tools to connect the whole thing up to whatever type of internet service they could get when they visited in an engineering lab or a conference room or wherever they might be. So the deal was they would go on a visit, they'd pull this stuff out, and they would bring the application engineer in our lab into the customer lab virtually. And it's handheld, so you'd be able to look at a board if you were troubleshooting something, or you'd be able to even look at the customer screen if you wanted to troubleshoot some code. And what made it all possible, well, two things. One, the internet service inside companies has got obviously better and better. So you had the bandwidth necessary, and the portability of the tools, the cameras and all of that had got better and better. But most importantly was the software platform that you run this on, really great algorithms, so good compression, great tools for whiteboarding and that kind of thing. And we looked at a bunch of them, and we actually settled on, and this was 2018, a little product called Zoom.
Yeah. And here the world is on Zoom.
No, exactly. So we figured all this out and quickly discovered that there was some pushback from the field salespeople, and some obviously customer base was skeptical, but we were providing almost the same level of experience on demand as a person actually showing up. Mm-hmm. And people quickly understood that was much more efficient. There was no scheduling. You got a problem, let's deal with it right now.
Yeah, the immediacy of this would be a huge advantage, I would think.
So that was working really well, and it actually put us in good shape for when we had to take the entire field sales team out of the field. We already had the tools. We knew how it worked. We were at this point working on version 2.0. Version 3.0, by the way, is probably going to involve some sort of, the smart glasses or holographic glasses.
Going more immersive.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're
okay.
looking
Well, before we get to that, I have a question that some may be wondering about. What about secure environments like government, military, or just highly sensitive companies?
So one of the things that was great about Zoom is it allowed us to do all of this using our salesperson's mobile phone as a hotspot.
Aha.
So we were able to get around, the firewall and connectivity issues.
Okay.
And because a lot of times we can't connect up. We can't do a screen share with an engineer, for instance. That even in non-government work, that's just a no-no. So we were able to do this and create, keep this air gap between what we were doing and the customer environment. That said, I know firsthand from visiting customers like BAE and others that are, prime contractors, defense contractors. You can't get in the building with a laptop, even a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So the whole thing breaks down in those environments. But in COVID, a lot of those folks are working from home, where for good or bad, probably for bad, a lot of those security protocols have slipped.
Yeah.
So we're able to actually engage this way with more people.
Gotcha. But still, you played the percentages pretty well, it sounds like, in your customer base. So then COVID hits and you already have a model. So then now I take it field sales becomes work from home for the most part?
Yep. We took the field out of field sales, and which was which was pretty interesting. We did it very quickly, but with a lot of concern, because this is our traditional way of engaging with a customer and for new business development. We send a field salesperson in, and they use their primary sensors, their eyeballs, to find opportunity, develop relationships, influence decisions, all the kind of the common things you think of for a field sales team.
Yeah.
And it's all very personal. And we depersonalized it. We made it contactless, like overnight, and then worried and a lot. But unnecessarily. I got to tell you, so to put this in context, 2020 was TTI's best year ever. Every single part of our business eclipsed what it was in 2019, in spite of COVID. And
that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a huge testament to the culture, but it was, the tools, and we're not alone in this. There are a lot of companies that have actually done really well in COVID. Even if their end markets struggled, they did better than they expected. And I attribute that to the fact that the technology was ready for COVID. The technology was ready for us all to jump into a foxhole. We had internet at home, the cameras and notebooks and good VPNs and all the rest of it. The technology was ready. If this had happened 5 years earlier, I think economically we would have had a much different experience. So this is, EA technology in a really bad situation. So, our field salespeople are working remotely. Business is thriving. One of our key metrics is demand creation, design wins, design registrations. And I fully expected those to crater, and they did just the opposite.
Wow.
They swole up. And so we finished the year well ahead on a lot of those metrics. And I'm still trying to get underneath that and figure out why. But one of the things that was pretty readily apparent was that some of it was just a productivity enhancement, with salespeople not having all that windshield time.
Mm-hmm.
We have salespeople.
Airplane time. I mean, that really does eat a lot of productive hours out of a person's day. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different salesperson to salesperson.
Sure.
But it is kind of a universal truth. And now they had, 8 hours to work and engage with customers, and we've given them the tools. Going into this, I don't think I mentioned this, but we had already pre-COVID really gotten on board with social selling and LinkedIn in particular.
Uh-huh.
So we've been doing some training on that. And so we were very fortunate. Our team was ready, and they did a really nice job of adjusting. And I tell you an area where it hasn't been as quite a bright picture is the new customer prospecting. Developing a new customer that you didn't have a relationship going into COVID with, or even developing people within existing customers, new relationships with existing customers. It's pretty tough to do it this way. Not impossible, but I suspect, given the title of your podcast, we will get into the role of content in overcoming some of those barriers. But outside of that, where we had relationships, 2020 was a pretty remarkable year, and 2021 is off the charts.
Wow.
I mean, yeah.
So you mentioned that you were very fearful of this lack of personal interaction specifically. And so now you moved to Zoom. I assume people had their cameras on and that's how they connected. So did that more or less make up, I guess, overtake that fear?
It did. And, so pre-COVID, for a couple of years, we've been doing what we call the TTI Roadshow. And we take the executive team out into each territory, and we organize a couple of days where we do kind of town halls and then individual customer meetings. So, we're bringing in high-level people from our company to meet with our customers, and a huge investment in time. And one of the things that we did during COVID times is we took that virtual. And we were concerned that people were going to be like, not the same thing. Just the opposite. Really well received. We were able to do more of them. We were able to better leverage the executive team's time. Mm-hmm. We got better attendance and had some amazingly high quality customer meetings.
Wow.
Honestly, some of them higher quality and more efficient than if we had been in person. Mm-hmm. And hugely expense efficient, time efficient. So we're getting used to the camera thing, and we keep telling people don't turn your cameras off. You got to be present, and if you do this right, I actually think you're more present in a virtual meeting, than you are in a real meeting. It's a little easier to kind of blend into the woodwork in a room full of people than it is.
That's a good point. Then this camera staring at you. Well, yeah. Michael, what I find interesting is in my own experience, so I've run a virtual business for 13 years. So this was kind of like another day at the office when COVID hit in some respects, but no one wanted to turn the cameras on either end before COVID hit in my experience. I mean, people would shy away from it. And then all of a sudden the cameras came on because I think people were so bored and cooped up. They just craved that human interaction. And so we had to quickly adjust, too, to make sure that we were presentable and not wearing the workout clothes and the ball cap or whatever. But I do find that you make a closer connection by having the camera on. It personalizes things. It relaxes people. It just sets a different tone. So I've really liked that change with all of it.
Well, and the fact is that we've evolved to be highly attuned to body language and facial expressions. And so it's a huge part of our communication. And without that camera on, if it's just audio, it's not the same thing. It falls well short and is not as effective. Now, most effective is in person. And so it's why we've spent 70,000 years evolving the wiring to be able to interact socially. So when all this is over, we are going to get back, in my opinion, a much more in-person everything than a lot of folks I read think. It's not going to, obviously, it'll never look the same. There's just too much efficiency that comes with kind of the COVID way of doing things. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be forever incorporated, but it's not going to be like this 100%.
Yeah. Okay. So let's be specific then. Do you see it being a hybrid now? Like a salesperson will be half field, half virtual, something along those lines?
Yeah, I do. I don't know what the ratio is going to be. It's probably going to end up being highly personalized based on the salesperson's type of temperament, based on the nature of their territory and their customer base, based on are they predominantly working with millennial generation people. One of the interesting things that I find about this time, and this is a great opportunity for marketing and a challenge for marketing, is in the workplace there are 5 generations, soon to be 6, and each of them communicate differently. They listen differently, and so I think technology makes it a lot easier to tailor your communication, your engagement to the generation of the person that you are connecting with. And so so the long and short of it is it's going to be a hybrid, but it's not going to be uniform.
And I like, or at least I'm inferring that you're providing some autonomy then for that salesperson to determine, okay, in this situation, I need to hop in my car and go in person. In this other situation, this is a millennial. Maybe I record a video for them, or we do something completely different. So
Yep.
very cool. Wow.
Don't send a recorded video to a boomer and expect a good outcome.
Yeah, and Gen Xers really like their emails, so send detailed emails with lots of links to lots of educational information.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, let's solve your prospecting problem, because Michael, your salespeople are expensive resources. I don't like the fact that you're having them doing prospecting. So how can we fix this for you? Let's talk about where you're investing in marketing this year.
Yeah, so this is a ongoing upward journey. So one of the things that I think is really cool about COVID is it has pulled marketing out of the shadows for a lot of us. It's so our marketing team has really taken the lead in providing content for social selling to our sales team, training, in taking a lot of the conferences and things we've done virtual, producing video. We've modernized more in the past 12 months than we had in the previous 12 years, especially on the market front. So going forward, in my group specifically, I spent last year investing in a new platform for all the companies that I work with. It's a web platform, an e-commerce platform that with a little bit of luck, we will stay relatively close to our launch date of next quarter, at which point then we're going to put all of our time and energy into developing next level, next generation content for these platforms. So what we'll be doing is heavily investing time and energy, resource into content for these platforms. And one of the things that I'm really big on is repurposing. Anything we do, I'm always asking, well, how are we going to be able to repurpose this? Don't think about it just in terms of putting it on LinkedIn. Think about it other social media platforms. Think about it, is it have a role in some sort of print or mailing campaign? Can we turn it into a video, whatever? So we'll put a lot of energy into repurposing this stuff, and with an eye towards giving this sales team, I guess what we would have called sales tools once upon a time, but now maybe we call them digital sales tools, right?
Yeah.
The things they need to, I think was telling you, I listened to your podcast with John Epperstein. Is it Esperin?
Esperin,
yes. Which, by the way,
yeah, I had to practice that. John Esperin. Yeah.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah.
Fascinating guy. I mean, full of great takeaways. I'm insisting that everybody on my marketing team listen to that, because I just instinctively get you got to provide value. Don't be boring. You got to be interesting. You got to have your own voice. Interject some humor into it. So we're kind of on this journey. That's what marketing is working on, is to modernize the sales team. And quite frankly, in my group, one of my aspirations this year is to lose the sales from the title, because I think more and more what they're doing, sales doesn't adequately capture it. It's an old-fashioned title for what they do and the value that they bring to customers and suppliers. So one of the things we're doing is researching alternatives. Titles are important.
Yes, they are.
You don't want to screw that up. So I think sometime this year we're going to come out with new titles, and then depending on how that works, we may adopt it through the entire family of companies.
Neat. Yeah, that makes so much sense because, wouldn't you rather talk to someone who was a consultant, for instance, than, a salesperson that you just assume is going to push something on you and has a quota versus someone who's there to help you and guide you towards an informed decision. So,
But
yeah.
and John, and your podcast said something that really clicked with me. He said, "Help first, don't sell first." And so when it comes to social media, and I would say that applies to everything,
Hmm.
whether it's online or it's in person. That consultative thing, I think, works a lot better. Help first, and then if you do that well, you earn the right to sell second,
There
maybe.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, it sounds like you are on an excellent track to embrace new tools and new ways of doing business as we go into the rest of 2021 and beyond. And everyone gets their vaccinations, and
Yeah.
you have this whole nimble, modern organization that's embracing the best of what we had before and the best we have available to us going forward. So I can't wait to follow your journey. It'll be interesting. Uh,
Interesting is a good word.
oh, I think you'll be wildly successful at it. I have no doubt.
Oh,
Uh,
and I think that's the opportunity for everybody. I mean, this is not, this is getting easier and easier to do. There's just a ton of resource out there. And if you're open to it, you can, put a new edge on your weapons of choice. And I think it's a remarkable opportunity for everybody to thrive because, the environment we're operating in, especially in electronics, is getting bigger faster.
hmm.
So there's plenty of room. And what's gonna kill you individually, wipe you out as a company, isn't lack of opportunity. It's lack of readiness to take advantage of the opportunity. It's if you get too paralyzed in the old ways, you're just going to get left behind, and not because people don't like you or they just they're not going to have time for you.
Yeah, yeah. No, you'll be disregarded before you ever were considered on that short list to come to the table.
Exactly.
Well, Michael, where can listeners go to learn more about you and TTI?
Probably, LinkedIn. I'm pretty proud of the LinkedIn profile that we have, and we've got, all of our people are on LinkedIn. I myself have spent the COVID year investing in, polishing what I do on LinkedIn, and I put a lot of stuff out there because maybe my third job is I'm the company crystal ball reader. So I'm looking at technology and trying to translate that into, what does it mean? Why should we care? And take that approach to you'll see a lot of that stuff from me on LinkedIn. So I can be reached through LinkedIn very easily. And the TTI LinkedIn site or the TTI website, and I think we've got a better than average website, is a good portal into the whole family, Mauser and Sager. So each of these companies has their own websites and their own material and stuff at this point. But a good entry point is ttiinc.com.
There you go. Okay. Well, I have to compliment you on your LinkedIn strategy of engagement. And as we were talking earlier about, I've just wrapped up a LinkedIn March Madness mini series, and one of the prevailing themes was about engagement and not just spamming your network with, automated posts, but really engaging, starting a dialogue. And you just do a wonderful job of not just posting something that you find interesting, but giving your point of view and inspiring others to respond and keeping that conversation going. So you're checking all the right boxes on LinkedIn. So people can go to just see what you're doing to see a good example of that in action.
Yeah, the one thing that one of many things I've yet to figure out on LinkedIn is I'm actually scared to death of coming across as salesy. So what I don't do a very good job of is using it as a platform to pitch my own company what we do, who we are. I am trying to be more conscious of helping kind of craft or evolve our brand, but I stop short of ringing the bell or singing the praises of our products and different things that we do. And it's something I've got to figure out.
Well, just keep the customer benefit at the forefront of your mind. So it's not, we have this new solution, but it's what can it do for, that target
Yeah,
buyer,
yeah.
whoever that is. And you can't go wrong if you have their needs at the forefront. So anyway, all right. Well, we know where to find you. Last question. Do you have any parting advice for others that are struggling balancing their traditional way of doing things and this new digital world we're living in?
Yeah, kind of short and sweet. I'm a big believer in get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the world is changing very fast around us, and so it's just how it is, But our grandparents would probably lock up with what's going on in the world right now, and the things that lock us up probably barely phase our kids, and our grandkids won't even notice them. So you gotta get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I also think that this is one of the things what we're talking about in terms of digital engagement. You just gotta jump in. You gotta try stuff, and you gotta experiment, and it's because this is a new muscle. This is a super interesting time to be in business, and it's like, as I said earlier, the opportunity ahead of us is, I think, just massive. But you can't be timid. You've just got to be out there. You got to try things and try and try and try. And I think even the boomers will be surprised how quickly they pick it up.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Michael. This has been fascinating hearing your stories, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and just sharing your journey. Thanks for your time.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit truemarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and our newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.